Okay, so I'll go ahead and get us started here. The title of our presentation today is Back to Work, Leveraging Technology to Increase Productivity and Maintain Safety Precautions. So best practices and lessons learned from 10 managed IT firms. So on this presentation, I'm happy to present our peer group here. We've got a few different panelists here. We've got first Doug Diamond, which I'll be providing some further introductions though. Doug Diamond is my business coach, and a number of our works with a number of us as a business coach. We've got Gary Harlem at Technology Advisory Group in Rhode Island. Alan Bauman with CompuWorks in in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Maine, Pittsfield, Maine, right? And we've got Sean Wright in Nashville, Tennessee with Affinity Technology Partners. I'm Keith Barthold, CEO of DKB Innovative in Dallas, Texas. So all of us together and the other companies here, we are all managed IT service providers. You know, one of the challenges that we've found and ran into right now was, we had one challenge getting all of our teams remote and helping facilitate the movement of all of our clients remote. It's a whole other set of challenges now looking at getting them back into the office, right? Following the safety precautions and the guidelines, which as you know, is a mixture of advice between CDC and WHO and the federal authorities, the governors, the county judges, wherever you're at in the nation. There's sort of mixed advice, and it's constantly changing. It's a lot to keep up with. Culture is very important, obviously, to not rush this and make people feel safe in moving back together and coming back into the workforce. But, we've all sort of struggled with how do we do this and how do we pull people back together and do this smoothly. So we'd like to just present and show you what we've done collectively, how we've wrestled with this, what are some of the tips and tricks that we've put together. Let me introduce the rest of the team. Also wanted to mention Joe T., Director of IT at Advanced in Baltimore, Maryland. We've also got Shane Purcell with Frontline out of Los Angeles, Trent Peters with Umbrella out of Kansas City, Steve Kennan with Proactive out of Charlotte, North Carolina. BJ Farmer is on here from Houston, Texas, his company SciTalk, and John Deegan with Cutting Edge in Orlando, Florida. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Certainly, if you have questions, all of us are on here to answer questions. Raise your hand, drop something in the question and answer box. We'll make sure that all of our moderators get to that and cover this during our presentation. We've got about an hour. We'll try to wrap this up in the next hour. But, certainly jump in, ask questions, and we'll get those covered. So I've got some quick facts on, sort of the work from home and the use of technology. It's certainly something that we've all been very busy with as IT service providers, securing our clients and helping them make the right technology decisions and make the best use of technology. Obviously, as you come back into the office, technology is a big part of that. There's an HR component of it. There's a culture component, but there's also the use of technology. How do we do it correctly? And that's what hopefully this panel together will help provide some advice and at least inspire some thought around how do you get moving back to return to the workforce in the office. So from an agenda standpoint, we're going to cover a few things here. One is just getting back to work and starting with Doug, and how do you ask the right questions and really understand what the readiness of getting back into the office and back to work is. Manage your team through that, using technology wisely to help do that? What are the IT best practices? And hopefully by the end, we've got some time for some question and answers. This is recorded. You've been invited by various service providers. All of us sort of collectively put some invites out. Certainly, if you have any questions, please reach out to the person that invited you to this, and we'll get recordings out to you shortly after this is completed. So I'd like to start with the first slide here and hand it over to Doug Diamond. I've known Doug for a while. He is the business coach for DKB Innovative and several others on this call. He runs a company, Doug Diamond Biz Improvement. And so we've got some contact information at the end of this slide deck. I would encourage you to reach out. I know that we wouldn't be where we would be as a company had we not engaged Doug Diamond early on. Running a business is about discipline, and he kind of keeps us in line. Kind of gives me a kick in the pants when he needs to. He's trying to get me to shave this mustache, but I think the ladies like it, and so we got a bit of a disagreement over that. But we'll see. Maybe that'll be resolved at some point soon. I'll turn it over to you, Doug.
Yeah, on my next poll, Keith, I'm going to put that mustache question out there. So
I appreciate that.
I appreciate the handoff. And look, I'm here to set the stage about what I've learned in a culture and engagement survey that I've been doing with teams all over the country. I started doing this survey 4 years ago, so I've been doing it for a while. But when the pandemic hit, I started to do what I'm calling a pulse survey, where I'm asking shorter number of questions just to allow teams to check in on what's going on with their remote workforce. And without getting into, I don't want to get into the details of the survey, but I've gotten responses back from enough teams that I started talking about this question about back to the office, and I got some really surprising results. So if you want to just forward to the next slide, Keith, I want to start talking about the results that I found and set the stage for everybody else here. Yep, just pop over. So I'm basically asking a bunch of questions where people can agree and disagree. And when I ask the question, how safe do you feel currently? You're going to see at the bottom of the slide there, on the far right is strongly agree, on the far left is strongly disagree, and every point in between. And you'll see that the average score of the teams that participated was an 8.8, which is a very high safety. So like, people right now are feeling very safe in their current conditions. And keep in mind, these are team scores. So every team is going to have some people that are on both sides of their score. The lowest team was in the moderately agree range. So that's very strong sentiment. People are feeling very safe. If you can pop to the next slide, please. I then start asking questions about, I broke people into groups. So I talked to the remote employees and the people that are currently working remote with respect to thinking about being ready to return from the workforce. You'll see the sentiment is much different. It's much wider. Come on back, Keith. There you go. The highest team score was on the far right, so close to a strongly agree, but the lowest team score was actually a slightly disagree. And that's, again, a team score. I saw scores all over the map on this. And so the thing that I'm learning from the survey results is that we've got to be very careful, because each team is very different with respect to its readiness to come back to the workforce. So if you can scroll into the next slide, Keith. We wanted to kind of get a sense of the people that were participating and throw up a poll question here about where you think your team would be at this point if you were to ask them, are they ready to come back to the workforce? So if you think they're a strongly agree all the way to a strongly disagree. So we wanted to kind of give you an opportunity. I've had an opportunity to do a webinar like this last week, and the results were just as chaotic as the results that I got on my survey. I'm kind of curious what this group is thinking, but it's like the northern states, it feels like they're really a lot more defensive and not ready. The southern states feel like they're a lot more aggressive and more eager to go back. So it's kind of, it breaks along geographic lines. It doesn't have anything to do with the size of the company. Big and small companies both were kind of all over the map.
Yeah,
How are we doing with the results?
I told Doug that, last week we went to a consultation and went in, no mask, shook hands, and Doug, being from Philly, went, "What in the world?" Right?
Yeah, my company, the people that I'm working with up in Philly, they're not ready to meet with me in person yet. We're still doing all remote meetings. So yeah, I haven't shaken somebody's hand since March. So yeah, that's pretty. Let me see. The poll kind of flips from strongly agree, mostly agree, 50-50 split, and mostly disagree. All right, so it's probably not as imbalanced in this conversation as I've seen in other poll questions, but it's still a pretty widely distributed group. So let's keep going through the results, and then I'm going to get it over to the other IT professionals here, which can talk about how to do it safely and well. So if we scroll further, I did a lot of study. When I sent out the surveys, I got not only agree and disagree questions, I got a lot of responses that were more just tell me what you're thinking. And I did word clouds around it. And this is probably one of the best word clouds with respect to what would you need to feel safe to return. And there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions here still, but I mean, a lot of PPE, social distancing, a lot of people said, I'm not going to feel safe to return until there's a vaccine, or I want more testing. So there's a lot of strong opinions out here. I tried to organize them on the next several slides to give people some concrete things to be thinking about. So let's jump to the next slide. So in terms of the remote team and keeping them feeling safe, as I said, vaccine or widespread testing was the #1 answer. They also said, we got to make sure the state and local governments are actually relaxing restrictions. So it's very specific to your state and local government. There were a number of people that said, I can't come in because of childcare or elder care. And there's a whole bunch of people that said, I won't come in. Like, I'm just afraid. I'm not leaving my house. I don't care if you tell me to come back to the office, I'm not coming. So we've got to manage those situations as well. We've got to make sure, in order to keep people feeling safe, we got to make sure that we restrict access to the office only to those people who are feeling well. So there's got to be some way that you can monitor the health of the people coming back into the workforce, because if they're not well, they are not welcomed by the other people there. You've got to, depending on where your offices are, what are the commuting issues? I mean, if they have to pay public transportation, that is going to be challenging for a while. So we've got to think about inviting people back based on the way they get to the office. We want to consider doing different shifts, perhaps. From a business continuity standpoint, it's wise to maybe have some people work some of the time and they will always work together, and other people working the other shifts, so that if one group in your office gets infected, your whole office isn't going down. So it's important, I think, to be thinking about business continuity, making sure that you're keeping the same people working together. You got to make sure you stockpile enough PPE. People are really, really strongly in favor of making sure that there's plenty of supplies at the office and that people are using them. The social distancing, I think, is the other thing that people mention all the time, is they want to make sure they keep that 6-foot distance. Thank you, Keith, for demonstrating. You look good in a mask. So let's pop to the next slide, if you would, please, while you put your mask on. Let me talk a little bit about people that are already working in your offices, because they have a different group of opinions because they're already there. They're afraid of people invading their space. Remember, everybody's feeling safe right now. So because they're feeling safe, they're reluctant to change. The people that are remote are reluctant to change. The people that are already in the office, people there are thinking about reconfiguring the office. They're looking around going, man, if we put everybody back in this space, there'd be way too many people in probably too many cramped conditions. So we've got to figure out, how do we reconfigure the space? And it's not just where people are sitting. We got to think about the walkways. If you've got a crowded support area where you've got lots of people, you can space them, but then people are walking right behind them. That's going to violate the 6-foot rule. You got to be thinking about high touch areas, things like coffee makers and refrigerators and whatnot. You got to institute some rules around those things. You got to make sure there's plenty of cleaning going on. People mentioned a fair amount of like what are the office's standards for cleaning? Are they going to be cleaned more frequently? Are they going to be cleaned to a higher level? So you got to be thinking about that. How many people do you want to allow in your common spaces? How many people can be in the kitchen at one time? It used to be a place where people congregated. Now it probably can't be. So where are they going to eat? We got to figure that out. Bathrooms and conference rooms and other places where people, we have many people in there at one time. You got to set rules around all this stuff. So the final thing here is that they wanted to make sure that there was a moat around the office. They don't want anybody but employees coming into the office. So we got to be very careful about outsiders coming in and making sure that they're abiding by all the rules that we know are so important. So let's jump to the next slide. Couple of things in terms of just planning, developing a return to work strategy is, key. You got to sit down with your people. You got to think this out. You got to make sure that you've identified, what work needs to be done in the office. So there are probably critical functions that have to be done there. So you've got to invite those people back first. You've got to identify sort of like the minimum resources that you need to get the work done and make sure that you're staffed for that. You've got to probably do a bit of a survey of your own about where each person on your staff is. Are they at risk, for example? Do they have a loved one who is working in a hospital, for example, or in some other situation where they're being potentially exposed? And you got to say, well, maybe we don't want you to come back to the office so quickly. And finally, we got to determine sort of which staff members, can continue to work from home effectively. There's a number of people that are able to work remotely, and if they're able to do so and it works to your company, then you should probably continue to let them for at least a while. Let's jump to the next slide, Keith. So in terms of staff availability, again, assess. You've got to do some questioning of your team. There's some ideas here in terms of classifying who's at risk and who has children, and elder care is an issue. Who's relying on the public transportation? Who would stand up and say, I really want to come back to the office if given an opportunity? I want to be first because my home situation isn't great for work and I want to come back. I got some feedback on, the staff hours and their willingness to work on sort of different shifts, which I'll share in just a second. So is there a flexibility with respect to hours? The next slide is going to speak to that. I was kind of surprised by this result. I thought people would be pretty flexible. And clearly there are some teams that are very flexible. One team scored a perfect 10, like they were strongly in agreement that they would be willing to be flexible. But I had another team that scored, this is a team score again, a negative 4.7. As a team, they were like moderately disagreeing with the notion that they're flexible. So you've got to really do a good job of talking to your people about whether they do or whether they don't have any flexibility in their schedule. So there's just a lot of misalignment around this scheduling question. So let's jump to the next slide. So a couple of things. This isn't hard. I mean, you got to think about this whole thing in terms of a phased-in approach. You got to think about sort of a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And I think that's got to be part of every company's plan. Ease people back into this. From a culture standpoint, you got to make sure that you're not rushing them back and that it's a very deliberate stage-in approach that people can kind of buy into. Once they're back in the office for maybe a half a day, and then maybe invite them in for a little bit longer and then a little bit longer, I think you're going to find that they're going to be more agreeable to come back in for longer periods when you give them just little short bites at first. So stage in the approach. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Critical office supplies that I don't know that this is going to be news to anybody, but I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that you got to think about in terms of making sure that people are safe coming into the office. gloves and thermometers and face masks and wipes. Wipes in particular are hard to come by right now, so are face masks. So you've got to really plan to get the supplies in advance of your coming back to the office. So let's bump to the next slide, please. So some guidelines to be thinking about, and then I think we're going to be ready to transition this back. So just thinking about meetings and what are our guidelines on getting together physically in the same room and congregating, even in hallways. Like we used to congregate around water coolers sometimes, right? We can't do that anymore. So we got to be intentional with the rules. And then as leaders, we got to follow the rules. You know, you got to think about the seating in the office and maybe taking seats out so that you don't have people tempted to sit in various places. You're traveling to client locations. You can't have two people in the same vehicle at this point now. You know, your work hours and your hygiene have to be thought out. So I think these are all just things that it's a complicated situation. There's a lot of misalignment. You've got to be intentional and in touch with your people. So that, I believe, gets me to the end of what I wanted to say. And now there's a whole bunch of smart people behind me that can talk about how to do this well.
Well, Doug, thanks so much. I know that, you know, when DKB did these polls, I will say that I was pretty naive going into it. I thought we would be in some general agreement on how this would work, and it turns out got a fairly divided office.
Yep.
This is pretty complicated stuff. Just the thought of how in the world am I going to solicit that feedback and get that information from my team? Like, do I create a Google form? Do I put this in MailChimp and survey my team? Let me ask you, if we twisted your arm hard enough, do you think we could get this survey information to the attendees on this meeting?
Yes, we can get the survey information, as well as they would like to participate in the survey for their own companies. I'm happy to work with them on that.
Awesome. Well, so there's a freebie for everyone attending to reach out to the person that invited you. Reach out to Doug. We'll have his contact information at the end of the slide deck, and he'll arm you with a survey mechanism that I will tell you, if we tried to come up, it would have been a full-time job for a week just to come up with a survey. So take that and use that to poll your team. So as we transition to the next topic, I want to put another poll up here. I'm going to move to the next slide, but we're going to transition to talking a little bit about KPIs and about performance management. This is something that all of the hosts here on this call, the panelists, are I would say tenacious about, very disciplined about having measurement of performance and having KPIs in place. Doug has taught us collectively a lot about that. I'm going to introduce Alan Bauman to continue this portion, and we'll start things off with a poll here to ask about how do you use KPIs and operations dashboards to manage performance, right? So are you waiting until the end of the month and looking at your P&L and going, yeah, we had a good month, or the end of the quarter and going, yeah, we had a good quarter? Or do you have dashboards in place and you're able to get a good pulse of where your team is at on those? Alan, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, let me sort of just give a little preface of kind of what I want to say here. And before we kind of dive off into the technical part of this, or the technology part of the conversation, we as a group really collectively felt that it was important to talk about how we manage companies in this kind of new reality, whatever that looks like, which is much different than we're used to. And, you know, as IT consultants, you might think, well, geez, what do you have to do with that? Except that there's very little space between how a business functions, this business strategy and its operational processes, and IT. So we effectively are, to some extent, IT and business consultants for all of our clients. Not to the extent that Doug Diamond is, certainly, but we are also keen observers of how our clients manage their companies. And so this feels like a very relevant topic, and certainly some food for thought as Keith brings up the poll here.
Yeah, so it looks like we've got a lot of KPI all-stars here. It's a good,
Awesome.
a good thing.
Right.
Surprisingly,
So
more than I
this is
would
going to
expect.
be like, yeah, it's going to be old news for you. So I'll kind of speed through this a little bit. And I will tell you that this is a huge topic, and all we're really trying to do here is pique your interest or not. Obviously, there's a lot more work to do in terms of transforming how you manage your business. But one observation that I would make, and a lot of our clients are in that small to mid-sized business range, 20 employees to 200, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And it's fairly common for organizations like that to operate pretty informally. It's the owner, it's the person that's been around for 20 years that kind of by instinct and gut feel moves the business in the direction that they want it to move in. It's interpersonal interaction, and so now that we're out of the office and kind of spread around, that's becoming more and more difficult. So so how do we replicate that? And I think some of the management techniques that are out there and that we'll talk about briefly here are good ideas anyway in normal times. But in a time like this, it seems to us that it's more important than ever. And Doug has referred to a lot of the themes here as transparency and clearly communicating goals that you have and making sure that your goals map to strategies. And Keith talked about KPIs, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. If you want to flip to the next slide. So, a couple questions to just think about that kind of tie into this is, if you ask your team whether or not they understand the big picture strategic goals of your organization, how would they answer that question? Do you feel like the team would give you a consistent answer? Would they shrug and not really know? Would they understand what it is that they do that kind of fits into that picture? In other words, when they show up to work every day and they do their job, do you understand why that matters and how it actually contributes to the success of the organization? And do those people have KPIs? Do they have metrics that kind of map to that they're really paying attention to? And the combination of these three things is very powerful. And it takes what it can be a very informal way of managing a company and turns it into something that's really data driven. It's very clear, it's transparent, people understand what it is that is expected from them. And if you do that, if you create a clear strategy and you communicate clearly to your employees where they fit in that and you pay attention to that, I promise you that you will move things in the right direction. And we've lived this for years and years, and most of the hosts on this call have, many of our clients have. So we're suggesting that, if you haven't sort of migrated to this kind of a methodology, you may want to think about this. And there are countless books that are written on this subject, and I'm not a business book junkie, so here's a few that I've been exposed to that I think are kind of variations on the same kind of theme. Traction is relatively new. That's gotten a lot of play recently. Scaling Up, The Great Game of Business is actually an older book that we kind of adopted as our Bible years ago, and they all kind of say similar things. And I'll use sort of the vernacular of The Great Game of Business because that's kind of the language that we speak. But they talk about knowing the rules of the game, and really all that means is you just have to understand what you're trying to accomplish. And that's true whether it's from the business perspective or from your day-to-day job perspective. You just need to understand that. And so that again is that concept of transparency. And then you need to measure it. You need to keep score. And then the last piece of it is a stake in the outcome, which I'll tell you is probably the least important, but it all really feeds back into this first point, which is that people want to feel successful when they come to work, and they talk about that as wanting to win. But it's really this innate desire for people to want to have meaning in their work and want to feel like what they do matters. And it's easier said than done in many cases, but if you can connect all of these dots, you will change the way your company performs, and you will move things in the right direction. It's a very, very powerful methodology. So you can flip to the next slide, Keith. So KPIs, as Keith was talking about, I mean, I love the Peter Drucker quote, "What gets measured gets done." Probably most of you have heard that. I don't think there's anything more true, and I would say the corollary to that is what doesn't get measured often doesn't get done. So it is fundamental, certainly, to the way we operate, and many high-performing companies operate. So the idea of these KPIs, and a KPI is just whatever it is in your business that you're trying to move the needle on. And they tend not to be static. You may have different KPIs that change all the time. The important thing is that your KPIs need to map to your strategic goals. In theory, if everybody's hitting their KPIs, you should be achieving your strategic plan. Again, easier said than done, a way bigger topic than we have time for in the next few minutes. But if it piques your interest, it is a very, very powerful combination of methodologies for running a business. But a KPI can be, in our business, we look at response times and resolution times and client satisfaction, and a manufacturing company might look at quality issues, around defects per thousand or something like that. The art of creating appropriate KPIs is something that you develop over time. And then, the important thing is you got to pay attention to them. It's not enough to simply say, okay, your KPIs is defects per thousand, and you're responsible for paying attention to that. You need to pay attention to that as a group and as a company, and as leaders, you need to reinforce how important those are. And so we do that by creating dashboards. And dashboards can be simple. This is a simple spreadsheet, and it's a great kind of way to start. I don't know who said it, but the perfection is the enemy of progress. So what you really want to do is not worry about perfection. Start simple, but have a dashboard and incorporate weekly meetings, huddles. Some kind of rhythm where you're reviewing these KPIs regularly. And I can tell you that simply paying attention to them will move the needle, regardless of whether you tie those into bonuses or anything like that. The next slide shows a little bit of a more automated way to do dashboards. So, in terms of how technology can help you, this is a screenshot from a software program called BrightGauge, but there are lots of dashboard tools out there. And, a spreadsheet is great, but it's a bit of a manual effort to populate it. Dashboarding tools allow you to kind of reach into your core application, pull out those KPIs, and then it really lends itself to displaying on kind of those war room monitors, big displays, and that give you real-time data. So, it's fine to look at historical data as long as it's not too old. I mean, obviously you can't change history. So being able to look at data in real time allows you to, change what's happening. If you find that your KPI is off today, you've got this afternoon to get it back on track. And you will find that if you present these numbers to people, they will work really hard to move them in the right direction. And the last slide that I have, Keith, is just a quick note on, incentives. And, this is really sort of off the topic of technology, but the idea that, you want to celebrate your wins, right? So, people are hitting their KPIs, they're working hard, they're really moving the needle. You should recognize that. And it doesn't need to be large sums of money. It can be, a party. It can be, paid time off. It can be, really anything. We do logo gear in our company sometimes. So, but the idea is that you want to recognize those wins. You want to appreciate that. If you do all of those things, you will have a company that is managed in a much, much different way than many small, sort of informal, gut feel organizations run. So again, big topic, and maybe that piques your interest. If it does, grab a book and start digging in. But I will tell you that this is well worthwhile, and there are ways that technology can help you with this, which I think leads into Gary's slides.
Yeah, and thanks for presenting that, Alan. I mean, I would just say to any of the attendees here, if you are interested in that, if you're interested in putting dashboards in place, the person that invited you here, we've all been schooled on this. We're all using dashboards and using KPIs actively in the business. And, if you look at it from a sports standpoint, sort of difficult to follow a football game if you don't have a scoreboard. And you need scoreboards for your team because yes, everyone is motivated by cash and they're motivated by getting paid. But when you can start gamifying and really showing people what is progress, what is moving the needle forward, and what is winning versus just activity every day in and day out, I promise you it will make a difference in your business, and it will change the culture too, because when people feel like they're winning and they know what winning is, they're just going to be a happier workforce. And so thank you for that, Alan. So as we transition over here to Gary, he's going to talk to us a little bit more about the technologies, the tips and tricks to bring your team in and make the most use of technology. You're muted, Gary. Gary, you are on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. Gotta love the technology that we don't even know how to use. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the technology that we've used specifically around collaboration. So at TAG, we were looking for ways to streamline our communications. Our old methods were no longer really adequate. We were looking to find out how Office 365 could help. We'd been using it a little bit for some of our things, but they offer so many different components. We started looking a little bit deeper. And we've heard and seen a lot with our customers, it's becoming the go-to platform for many people who want to collaborate. There's very tight integration between many of the components, and it keeps getting better. Microsoft's doing a really good job along those lines. One of the most important things, security. All the communications are very secure and very private. Now, we could spend the next few hours or even the next couple of days discussing many of the apps, but in the interest of time, we're going to focus on a couple of them that have really helped us to collaborate within our organization, and I know many of our partners are doing the same. We'll talk about Microsoft Teams. It's a communications and a workspace portal. SharePoint is an intranet and document repository. And Bookings is a website that helps to simplify appointment bookings. And a last one is technically not an app, but Microsoft Find Time is really helpful in booking some appointments from a different perspective. First off, Keith, next slide, please. So Microsoft Teams is really becoming a workspace that brings together many of your Office apps and even third-party integrated programs. Interestingly enough, I mentioned the integration. Microsoft is opening up many of their applications, as you'll see here and a little bit later on, to third-party companies to show their data right within their applications. People can connect via chat, video, voice, and sharing their screens. It makes it really easy to work together as a group. Let's start with the chat. The chat area is divided into teams. The terminology can get a little bit confusing, but if you think of a team in terms of a department in your company, human resources, finance, manufacturing, certainly teams, though, don't need to be limited to one department. It can include people from many or any combination of departments. For example, you might have a team for a safety committee. Within that team, you can separate that information into channels or topics. A sample channel for human resources might be benefits, payroll, corporate policies. It's an area for people to share information on each of those topics. A channel for a manufacturer might include a production dashboard, something that Alan talked about a few minutes ago. Each channel can have multiple pages, each with different types of information, posts, files, wikis, reports, some of those third-party applications I mentioned, generic pages that could be some of anything. So for example, if you're using another program like Microsoft Planner and you want a quick spot to view your project plan, you can dump that right onto a page in Teams. You can embed dashboards too. Each of those types enhances your ability to stay in touch and share information with each other. Again, security is really easy. You invite those that need access. Only those that are invited can see those channels or those the teams. And one of the nice things, you can invite folks from outside your organization also. One of the ways
Gary, could you have something that's sort of outside of business, like a water cooler, channel just for sort of social things?
There's no rules or anything of that nature. That's the beauty of it. We have multiple topics. We have a general category. Anybody who wants to put up announcements, things that are coming up or things of that nature, absolutely.
So you could have a
and it's very
channel for
interactive.
people that love mustaches, right?
What's that?
You could have a channel for people that love mustaches.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'll get very many people on that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's a good point. Yeah. Think about these things.
Yeah, but one of the nice things, though, is regardless of the topic or the team, it's important to know what's going on. So with notifications and mentions, everybody knows what's going on. If you're addressing a post and you want to make sure that the person it's targeted at or your group needs to know about it, you can mention them in your post and they'll get an alert. Likewise, if you're mentioned either individually as part of a group, you'll get that alert, and all these alerts show up on your activity list. Certainly you don't have to wait for those activities, but you can go to those topics and read through the chronology of posts. They're all threaded topics, and anybody can post a topic or a thread and start a new conversation, and people can reply to them. And the nice part about it is they can do it at their own pace. They don't have to do, it's nothing about real time. They do it at any part of the day that they want. And sure, people like to keep it fun. There's plenty of emojis, GIFs, and stickers to keep it random and keep it fun. In addition, and we make a lot of use of this, there's private chats. So I can just go to any member of my team or combination and have a private chat that's just between one-on-one or a couple of us, and you can go back and forth. And as you'll see on the next slide, when we start talking about meetings, any of these chats can be turned into a meeting on the spot. So Keith, okay, there you go. So meetings can be scheduled or impromptu. Especially with the remote workforce, over the last 2 months, I probably have 3 or 4 impromptu meetings a day, most of which will include a screen share where we just need to help each other out. Instead of somebody coming into my office and looking at my screen, they do it from across town. So like anything, like any other meeting, you invite the people that you want. If it's scheduled, it's going to show up in your calendar. Like all the other meeting apps, when you send out an invite, you're going to get a link to the meeting, and it can be a screen share, it could be video, it could be chat, it doesn't matter. I'll mention one thing about Teams hold on one sec. For many people who are used to Zoom or some of the other platforms where you can have 25 or 30 people on a screen, right now Teams is limited to 9. They're talking about more. So if you're really looking for somebody where you have to see a large group all at the same time, it might not be the best for you, but keep that in mind. It hasn't been a problem for us. Now it can go on. One of the nice things, though, is for people who like to sit in the conference room and put a concept up on the board, use their colored markers and bring a concept to life. Guess what? There's a whiteboard here. You can do the same thing here. But the nice part about it is you don't have to wait in turn to put up your little annotation on the whiteboard. You can pick up a marker at the bottom of the screen and start writing all at the same time and co-author. Next slide. Couple of quick things just to bring it together. The calendar, as I mentioned, it's the same calendar as you have in Outlook. So it's not like you're maintaining a separate calendar. They're all tied together. We talked about that integration between the apps. And what platform wouldn't be useful without a powerful search tool? You can search across messages, across the people, across files. Once you start coming up with results, you can filter them to really hone in on your information. The toolbar is very customizable. The applications that you use regularly can be added. I'll note one real quick thing about the file system. When you look at the file section, it's not just files and Teams. It actually shows you files from your Office apps, things that you've been referencing either online or offline. You can even add third-party cloud platforms like Box, Dropbox, ShareFile, Google Drive. So all of that data can be accessed in one spot. And again, we talked about some of these custom pages like reports and dashboards. Becoming that customizable workspace where you can bring together many of the things that you work on. One last kind of benefit is, and we're seeing that as we've brought on some new employees, the new employees have the ability to go back and look at history and see what's there and quickly search on the threads to figure out what's been talked about in the past. Slide. Microsoft Bookings. It's essentially a website that it's not part of the Office 365 programs as you know it, but it's integrated. You can create a website where you can give outside folks the ability to pick an open time slot that you've got, or an open time slot across people in your team, and book a time that's convenient for them. Again, the booking site has access to your calendar because it's part of 365. So basically you go in and you define a service, which could be a certain amount of time, and you can allocate or tell it who has to be involved, and it will find the available times. So when you'll see on the next slide in a moment that when you browse through the days, each day it will show you the time slots that are available for you to pick. When you book it, an appointment email is automatically sent out, as are the reminders to remind people, and it helps to cut down on missed appointments. This can be really useful for people who sell time slots, a lawyer, an accountant, even like a salon where you need to give people the ability to book time for you, and you want to cut down on your involvement in doing so. On the next slide is another tool. It's technically not an Office app, but it's a plugin for Office 365 that works with all recent versions of Outlook, and it allows you to create a poll in order to help the attendees pick a time that they want to and vote on the available times. Basically, the organizer will put together a couple of sample time slots that they think will work. You send out the poll to each person, and on the next slide, you'll see that they can actually vote up, and you can see in the portal or the little dashboard, each of the people can note which ones will work or won't work and vote on their preference. And at the end, once the organizer says, fine, I've got an information, you'll see the button off to the right to book and create that meeting. SharePoint.
Gary, I really like just the back and forth emails a dozen times just trying to find a meeting spot. So
you know, we try to do it, and it works really well. You know, when especially with these remote workforces, we're doing everything we can to get out of email, and that's going back to the prior topic of Teams. That's one of the things that we've noticed dramatically is the emails and some of that banter really cuts down on the inbox, which is, I think, is one of the big values.
Awesome.
Yeah. SharePoint, moving along, is a document management and collaboration platform. Basically, it's a combination of websites that allows you to store data and access it very easily. So for example, we were looking to get the information off of our file server, our shared drive, and make it more accessible to our employees, both in and out of the office. We moved it up to SharePoint, and suddenly everybody has access to that data, both in and out of the office. As you'll see on the next slide, basically, you divide your SharePoint area into sites. Just like in Teams, a site could be a department. And you can see in our case, there's an assortment of functional groups, in some cases personal, and or organizational groups. Within a group, on the next slide, you'll see that we create libraries. Libraries are, again, flexible. They can be documents, lists, certain kinds of pages, news feeds, or again, third-party app, integrated apps. Keith, you can go one more. Again, security is really important. So you can you get to control who has access to all of that data. Again, internal or external users get to access that data. You can sync that data to your local computer, so you can use it online or offline. One of the most important features that we use all the time, you can co-author those documents as long as you're online, of course, and people can edit the documents at the same time. The presenters, we were editing this PowerPoint before the presentation concurrently. It works really well. Files are auto-saved as you go now. You no longer have to worry about saving your file every 5 or 10 minutes. You can create guest links, so you can share out links to public people and include people from outside of your company. And again, the search. You can search for information, whether it's file names, folders, content of the documents in a site or across sites. Next slide. Here's another example of embedded of a dashboard. We've created a site which pulls in one of our dashboards. You know, as Alan mentioned, we have this dashboard up on a screen in our office, but guess what? People aren't in the office right now. Lastly, if you're interested in learning more about any of these products and how it can help you or your organization to collaborate, reach out to the folks that invited you. We'll be happy to help get you set up and trained. One of the most important things also is just because your data is in the cloud, don't always assume it's safe. You should always make sure that you've got a third-party backup and a way to keep that safe. So Keith, back to you.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Sean Wright out of Nashville to sort of wrap us up here. We're at about a 5-minute warning. I know that if you've got a drop, certainly do that. Got a couple of slides to wrap up, but we'll stick around for an extra 5-10 minutes for questions, or really as long as you want, if you're able to stay over the hour. So
yeah, I think we'll tell people we'll be here. You know, we're running a few minutes late.
All right, unmute it, Sean.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate just hearing everything. I know we're trying to Doug's point, decide with our culture, how do we roll people back into the office, looking at our KPIs, and then making sure we're using the tools, much like what Gary was talking about. And just on this particular slide, I wanted to point out with that picture on the left, we got some headsets, we got a monitor there, we got probably a mouse, maybe some cords there, but as people transitioned out of the office and they're coming back in, we want to make sure whatever they took home to work so they could be productive, we want to make sure that's coming back. So there's some non-technical things to be aware of, to be thinking like, okay, what actually did go back out comes back in, and just like the physical stuff, we want to think about what data they took home. Did they take home files and folders, physical files and folders, and making sure those come back. And then when you have 50 people rolling back into the office and they're trying to plug all of those things back in, that's going to be a lot of, maybe some frustrations for the users, and they're going to need help. So I was thinking about staging that through so that way the IT staff can make sure they're responsive and available. And just while we're thinking about all of this, we need to be thinking about just security. And on the next slide, just the awareness of security, making sure that, whether people are working at home or they're back in the office, there's just a slew of phishing where they're posing as trying to hook into just the fear that is out there in the environment, and from a business compromise email to faking as someone else, just making sure we do staff training so they're aware. So all of the normal things, they're all elevated. We want to make sure there's tools to engage people so that they can realize, what does it look like to get a phishing email? What does it look like to respond to the CFO when, wait a second, was that from the CFO? And how do they know it wasn't from the CFO? But all of those things that we normally 6 months ago had to be aware of, and we're training our staff, it's all heightened as well. Make sure they're aware of VPNs, and then, pushing out all the system updates and any of the threat detection software that all of us from an MSP provider, utilize to help protect data, protect clients and their businesses. So I'm going to keep, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover, just from an IT perspective, that all the stuff that we covered previously, it still focuses and it all wraps up into, some of the IT stuff that is just every single day.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So if you have any questions, we've been watching. Our audience is pretty quiet here. Haven't put any questions in here to stump us. I was gonna take the really difficult questions and give them over to Joe, because Joe knows it all, and he's been pretty quiet too. So please give us some questions so we can play the game of Stump Joe here. I am going to put this up on the screen as we wrap up, and would encourage you to contact Doug. He's put a lot of work into this survey. Certainly, if you're interested in business improvement, contact him. I know, as I mentioned, business is tough. It takes a lot of discipline, and sometimes you need a coach that'll slap you around and keep you on the right track. And Doug does that in the nicest way possible. But I know that we're much further ahead than we would be had I relied on my own self-discipline and not sought out wise counsel like Doug to help us all push
but
forward.
Also just to reiterate, Doug has nicely volunteered if anybody wants to just partake in the surveys without the full burden of making your business better. That's certainly available to everybody on the call also.
Yeah,
because I twisted his arm earlier, right?
Keith is so persuasive, but yeah, I mean, if you want to give it a try with your team, I send you a link, you send it to your team, so I don't get any email addresses, and then I just gather up the results. I send it to the CEO of the company for you to look at. If you need help on interpreting it, I'm happy to help with that.
I just want to add, any of the attendees, we love to do these webinars, so if there's any input on things you'd like to hear or understand in the future, I think that would be great. Just let us know what it is.
There's a lot of expertise on here, from business side to technical side, to be sought after. So we love helping.
All right, so we do have a question here. And Joe knows, so I'll see what you can do here, Joe. So liability, question is liability. I own and operate a dance studio, so we're worried about not only our staff, but also our customers. Currently, our liability insurance does not cover pandemics. Have you or any of your customers had similar issues?
Yeah, yes, I would have to say yes. This is something everybody's concerned about. As simple as not even just a dance studio, I also volunteer for rec sports. Liability insurance, they wonder about how does that cover rec sports as well. So it's definitely something we need to be very concerned about. It's something we really need to talk to our legal counsel that we have, so we can get some advice from them. And it's changing all the time. Every day you'll get a new response. So really being in tune with your legal team and understanding what they have out there is definitely something that we should be aware of and be in contact with them regularly.
Yeah, when we pulled together our policy and really the guidelines on bringing the team back in, we felt like it was smart to sort of pull in an HR consultant, just look over things and go, does this look right? What do we need to add from a liability standpoint? Because obviously we all think that we're pretty good with HR, and we don't want to make a mistake of being a little too naive about it and find ourselves in a deposition going, well, maybe I wasn't as good at HR as I thought I was. So there's another pointer, is maybe when you put that guideline together, get some HR opinion on it.
We have another question, is how does working from remote affect cybersecurity insurance? And this is something, everybody should be thinking about and talking about, and that's why we want to have these webinars. Now that you've moved home, we went from the traditional castle, as I like to say, you're at a fortress and everything's protected behind that fortress. Well, now we've sent everybody home and we have all these mini castles. And what are we doing to protect and make sure that they're secure at each location. So definitely, that's where we want to come up with the plans and be talking with your managed service providers to understand, do we roll out some sort of IT hardware set at the house? It's definitely something that is going to have effect on our cyber security insurance coming. And just from what happened recently, you're going to see an increase in cyber security insurance, especially with the attacks over the last few years. And that's why security should be top of mind and something that we're all thinking about at all times.
Another question here is, can teams integrate with other software to help automate things we do manually now?
So I think the answer to that is it's a definite maybe. Depends on what you're looking to do. There are some third-party programs that do some sort of integrations and automation depending on what you're looking to do. So I'd probably reach out to your provider, the company that invited you, and ask a little bit more information. And the answer is a definite maybe.
I would say there are a lot of options around that, depending
Yeah.
on what you want to automate. A lot of people on this call that specialize in automation. So I would encourage whoever invited you here to plug them in. And, it's one of those things to where if you reached out to Gary and you need some help with automation, he would probably bring it in front of the whole group and go, hey, I got a problem here. Let's bring this together. And as a group, bring you a solution. And so that's the power of a peer group and a relationship like we have, is that there's a lot possible with technology, and we use the collective wisdom of everyone here to provide that for our clients.
Oh, this one's for you, Al. How do we know what KPIs we need to be monitoring?
Oh, that's such an easy question. Yeah, that is a great question, and I absolutely can't answer that because it depends completely upon your business. But the idea of a KPI is you want something that is measurable, right? And you want to be able to set a goal, and there's a bit of an art to it, because you need to be able to set a goal that's attainable, yet not too easy. You want to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. And, ideally those KPIs should roll up to your strategic plan. So if you hit all your KPIs, you should be achieving your strategic plan in theory. But I'm actually going to let Doug answer this question, because I think he's going to give you a better answer than I will.
I don't know about better answer, Alan, but I'll add to your answer by saying, if you think through each of the major functions of your company, ask yourself the question, how do I know if a person in that function has had a good day or a good week? How do you measure their success? And that should lead you to the KPIs for that function. And then you teach them what makes it clear that they had a good day and a good week. And you talk to them about the targets on those measures. And you keep expanding the conversation with them. So I would use that sort of what is a good day and a good week as a starting point, and let it grow from there.
I think Doug gave me the advice before, is that, hey, when it comes to this business planning and KPI selection, you're not going to get it right the first time. You may not even be close. But it's the process that counts, right? And it's the refining it and getting better and better at it.
So every mistake you make gets you closer to where you want to be. So you just got to get through the mistakes.
Yep.
Or I like to say, experience is a great teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if it doesn't kill you, then it makes you stronger, right? Isn't that what they say?
That's what we hope, yeah.
We've got another question here. Does it cause HR problems for some staff to work from remote and some at the office and some transient? And that's a great question.
I would just say, from coming from a bigger company that we have like 185 employees, it's going to be tough for us to bring all people back at once. So we've definitely been working with our HR to come up with some guidelines. Definitely would say having clear guidelines on who you're bringing back and why, and some of those rules around it. Definitely you got to take in what Doug was talking about, some of your at-risk people and those people, and they get eliminated right off the bat. So it's really working through with some of your HR and coming up with an idea and some plans on how you're going to bring home the phases. Phase 1 is going to be new hires, maybe. Phase 2 is going to be whoever it may be. But definitely having some sort of plan and working with your HR department and coming up with some social distancing guidelines. I really think it centers around having a lot of documentation and just trying to do the best you can.
Yeah, so I'll tell you one thing that we sort of learned from this and worked with Doug and others is that's probably not a hill that you want to die on, that you draw such a hard line to say, well, if you don't come back to the office, then you don't work here, because you don't know what's going on, right? It may be that they're taking care of elderly parents or that there are underlying health conditions. I think this is a time, at least it is now, right? Maybe later on, and maybe this is a different story 3 months from now. But as of right now, what we figured out is let's encourage people to come to the office, but let's have some flexibility and understanding, because we don't know what the situation is, and we don't know how scared someone might be or what the underlying concerns are. And so let's encourage, but not require people back in the office. That won't work for every company, but that's sort of the conclusion that we drew.
And I think one of the other things that we've talked about at the peer level with the IT companies, which is back in March when everything started hitting the fan and everybody was going home at the same time, we were inundated with requests and people couldn't get that service as quickly as they wanted. So one of the things we want to make sure that we're going to our clients ahead of time and having the conversation about planning that return to work and thinking about how much help you're going to need as people start coming back to the office. And on the flip side, making sure, going back to some things I talked about earlier, if you're not doing a good job or comfortable with people in multiple locations, think about how to better collaborate with your team.
Yep. We're going to wrap it up with the final question here. Someone mentioned what problems will we run into if we don't follow social distancing, cleaning, and mask requirements. I'll say we've struggled with the same thing. What's the worst that could happen? Your entire office could get COVID-19,
right.
Or you could find yourself in the middle of an HR lawsuit because you were negligent in protecting your employees. That's the worst that could happen. And, that's why we said we're going to have some flexibility here because that could very well happen. We want to be cautious. And so I think you really have to think about doing everything you can to protect your team, providing masks, providing PPE, all of that.
And I just want to add that this makes perfect sense of what we've been talking about. If you cannot or don't have somebody that's going to be able to make sure you're doing social distancing, cleaning, and the mask requirements, then work with your managed service provider, your IT company, to figure out a way to empower your teams to work remotely, because that's going to help you from having to worry about some lawsuits that may be coming down the roads.
That's exactly right. If you can use technology and you can get the same level of productivity working from home, maybe you don't need to rush back into the office so quickly, or have a mixture and have part of that office. And, maybe it changes for the long term too, and you don't need as much office space by using a hybrid approach with people in the office and out of the office. So that's pretty much it. We're 12 minutes over. I want to wrap this up. I want to thank all of the panelists on here. Thank you, all of the attendees. I would encourage you to reach out to us. The person that invited you, reach out to Doug. Take advantage of that survey, and good luck and Godspeed getting through everything that's going on right now. We're here for you, and we'll have more of these webinars to come to help your business and your organizations. Thank you.
Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, Doug.
Guys.